Remember when cars weren't just transportation, but rolling showcases of, well, let's call them experimental ideas? Some features felt cutting-edge back then, others were just baffling marketing ploys. What they all have in common is that time wasn't kind to them. So, grab your keys metaphorically speaking, and let's take a spin down memory lane, looking at 20 car features that vanished, often for very understandable reasons. These are the ghosts of automotive past. Swivel bucket seats. Ever secretly wished your car seat could do a full 360 like a swanky bar stool? Well, for a little while back in the day, it actually could. Starting in the late 1950s, car companies, always looking for the next big thing in comfort and maybe a little bit of showroom pizzazz, rolled out swivel bucket seats. The idea was pure convenience mixed with a dash of cool. Imagine effortlessly pivoting to exit your car, like sliding out of a booth at your favorite diner instead of performing awkward automotive yoga. General Motors really leaned into this during the 60s and early 70s, popping them into cars like the Chevrolet Monte Carlo and Oldsmobile Cutlass. For a brief, shining moment, it felt like the future of car interiors. Getting in and out was undeniably easier, especially in big, two-door coupes, and it added a certain flair. But, like many flashy ideas, the novelty wore off when reality set in. The swivel mechanism itself could be finicky, prone to breaking, and it took up valuable interior real estate. Plus, some folks complained about feeling a bit unstable, like they were perched on a rolling office chair during turns. Practicality eventually won out, and by the late 70s, the spinning seat took its final curtain call. Chrysler tried a brief revival with their swivel, Ingo minivan seating in the 2000s, but again, it didn't quite catch on. Turns out, easy exits aren't everything. Voice alert systems. The 1980s. A time when synthesized voices were the future, apparently even inside your car. Automakers got it in their heads that what drivers really craved wasn't better fuel economy or a smoother ride, but a robotic nag built right into the dashboard. Think of it as the car's attempt at being helpful, channeled through the personality of a disgruntled speak and spell. These early voice alert systems were less KITT from Knight Rider and more like getting driving tips from a calculator. Chrysler was a prime offender with cars like the LeBaron, famous for its monotone pronouncements. Your fuel level is low, or the unforgettable, a door is ajar. That last one probably launched 1,000 family arguments over what ajar even meant. The idea was noble, keep eyes on the road, but the execution often felt like being trapped with a co-pilot who only knew 3 phrases and couldn't take a hint. The constant, unmutable alerts turned futuristic novelty into sheer annoyance pretty darn quick. Thankfully, clearer digital displays and simple icons took over, leaving these chatty dashboards as a quirky footnote in automotive history, a reminder that not every tech idea sticks the landing. Pop-up headlights. There was a time when making a car look cool involved actual moving parts, adding a little mechanical drama and risk to the equation. Hideaway headlights, or pop-ups as most of us know them, were the ultimate expression of this. They gave cars a sleek, aerodynamic look during the day, then dramatically revealed themselves at night, like the car was waking up or raising a curious eyebrow. It was pure automotive theater. While we often associate them with 80s sports cars or American muscle machines, the concept actually goes way back to the stunning 1936 Cord 810, which wowed crowds with its disappearing lights. Alfa Romeo played with the idea too, but it really took off in the 60s with cars like the Lotus Elan, which featured electrically powered pop-ups that felt straight out of a spy movie. Of course, this coolness came at a price. The motors controlling the lights were notoriously temperamental. Sometimes one light would pop up, sometimes neither, sometimes they'd get stuck halfway, giving the car a perpetually sleepy or confused look. Repairs could be expensive, and finding parts wasn't always easy. Eventually, pedestrian safety regulations, cost-cutting, and the advent of sleeker, fixed headlight designs using LEDs and projectors spelled the end for pop-ups. The last cars featuring them rolled off the line in 2004, Closing the book on an era when headlights didn't just illuminate the road, they made a statement. Vibrasonic sound system. You have to wonder what was going on in the design labs sometimes. Were they geniuses or just bored? Case in point, General Motors' brief experiment with the Vibrasonic sound system in the late 1950s. They basically decided your Buick needed the acoustics of an empty gymnasium. The promise? To drench your radio tunes in lush, echoing reverb, making that AM broadcast sound like it was performed live in the Grand Canyon or maybe just a very large, tiled bathroom. The goal was to make car audio feel richer and more immersive than the tinny speakers of the era typically allowed. So, GM rigged up systems with amplifiers and special reflectors designed to bounce sound waves all around the cabin. Initially, it probably sounded impressive, giving music a sense of grandeur. But the downsides quickly became apparent. Trying to have a conversation felt like shouting across a cave. News reports became garbled echoes, and that rich reverb just made everything sound muddy and weird after about 5 minutes. On top of that, installing the system was apparently a headache, leading to rattling panels and inconsistent sound quality. Drivers probably started longing for the simple clarity of standard radio. Interestingly, the idea didn't completely die. Toyota even offered reverb switches on some models decades later in the 80s. But Vibrasonic itself faded out by 1965, a testament to the fact that sometimes more isn't actually better, especially when it comes to echoes. Automatic seatbelts. Here's a safety feature that felt more like a well-intentioned ambush. In the late 1970s and into the 80s and 90s, facing pressure to increase seatbelt usage and meet passive restraint regulations, automakers came up with the automatic seatbelt. The idea was simple: take the driver out of the equation. Forget buckling up, the car would do it for you. These systems typically involved a motorized shoulder belt mounted on a track along the door frame or roofline. Close the door, and the belt would automatically slide into place across your chest, sometimes with surprising speed. It was meant to ensure compliance, but the execution was often clumsy and annoying. Many designs still required you to manually fasten a separate lap belt, defeating the automatic point for full protection. Some door-mounted versions were particularly awkward. You'd have to duck under the belt just to get into the seat. It felt less like a safety feature and more like wrestling with your own car. This Rube Goldberg approach gained traction partly because seatbelt use was shockingly low back then, under 15% by 1983, and it was an alternative to installing airbags, which were more expensive initially. But users quickly grew tired of the inconvenience, the frequent mechanical failures, belts jamming or moving slowly, and the general feeling of being manhandled. Once airbags became standard and far more effective, these motorized contraptions thankfully disappeared, sliding silently into the junkyard of bad ideas. Cassette players. Long before streaming and satellite radio, the soundtrack to your drive came from a little plastic rectangle filled with magnetic tape. The cassette player wasn't just a device, it was the heart of the car's entertainment system for decades. Kicking off in the early 70s, these players finally gave drivers complete control over what they listened to, liberating them from the whims of radio DJs. Suddenly, your car transformed into a personal concert hall, blasting your favorite albums or carefully curated mixtapes, assuming the tape didn't get chewed up by the player, a frustration every child of the era remembers well. As the technology matured through the 80s, cassette decks became more sophisticated, boasting features like auto-reverse, so you didn't have to flip the tape manually, Dolby noise reduction to quiet that persistent hiss, and buttons for skipping tracks that rarely landed exactly where you wanted. Brands like Pioneer, Alpine, and Blaupunkt became dashboard royalty. People poured hours into crafting the perfect road trip mixtape, each song choice a deliberate mood setter. Ironically, one of the hottest car audio accessories in the 90s was the simple cassette adapter, a fake cassette with a wire that let you plug in your portable CD player or early MP3 player. It was the tape deck's last hurrah, a bridge to the digital age that would soon replace it entirely. But for a whole generation, the satisfying clunk of inserting a cassette was the sound of freedom on the open road. Opera windows. Ah, the opera window. If ever there was a car feature that screamed, "We need to make this look fancier, add something, anything," this was it. Popular from the early 1970s through the mid-1980s, these were small, often oddly shaped, oval, round, sometimes rectangular with rounded corners. Windows typically set into the C-pillar, usually surrounded by a padded vinyl roof. You saw them everywhere on big American luxury barges, Lincoln Continentals, Cadillac Eldorados, and Seville's, Chrysler New Yorkers. They were meant to evoke the feeling of private boxes at the opera, suggesting exclusivity and old-world charm. In reality, they offered virtually no visibility for the driver or passengers. They didn't open for ventilation. They were purely decorative, a little piece of automotive jewelry intended to signify prestige. Sometimes they even had the car's emblem etched into them, just to double down on the branding. But like shoulder pads or shag carpeting, their time eventually passed. The look became dated, associated with the excessive, sometimes gaudy style of the era. Plus, they could be another potential spot for leaks or rattles as the seals aged. As car design shifted towards cleaner lines, better aerodynamics, and improved visibility in the late 80s, the opera window quietly exited the stage, leaving behind a faint outline on countless vinyl roofs, a curious relic of perceived luxury. Ashtrays and cigarette lighters. It might seem wild to younger generations, but there was a long stretch of automotive history where having a place to ash your cigarette and light the next one was considered an essential, standard feature as basic as having a steering wheel. From the 1950s onward, cars didn't just have one ashtray. They often had them integrated into the dashboard, on the back of the front seats, and in the rear door panels. And the cigarette lighter wasn't just a power outlet. It was a dedicated, spring-loaded heating element designed specifically for lighting tobacco. Automakers put thought into these. Luxury models often featured illuminated ashtrays for nighttime fumbling, and lighters that popped out with a satisfying thunk, glowing red-hot and ready. This wasn't just accommodating a habit. It was reflecting a time when smoking was commonplace, socially acceptable, and even glamorous in many circles. The car's interior was designed around it. But societal views shifted dramatically. Growing awareness of health risks and widespread smoking bans began to push cigarettes out of the mainstream. In 1994, Chrysler made headlines by being the first major American automaker to remove cigarette lighters and ashtrays as standard equipment, making them optional instead. Others soon followed. The ashtrays vanished almost entirely, sometimes replaced by small storage cubbies or cup holders. Ironically, the lighter socket itself survived, transforming into the ubiquitous 12-volt power outlet we use today for charging phones, running GPS units, and powering a myriad of gadgets, a practical second life for a feature whose original purpose literally went up in smoke. Curb feelers. Before fancy parking sensors and backup cameras, drivers had a much more tactile way of knowing they were getting too close to the curb feelers. Think of them as low-tech whiskers for your car. These were typically flexible wires or springs mounted low on the fender, usually near the front and or rear wheels. As the car drifted too close to a curb while parking, the feeler would scrape against the concrete, creating an unmistakable grinding or screeching sound that alerted the driver to stop before scuffing those precious white wall tires or expensive hubcaps. Popular primarily in the 1950s and into the 60s, an era obsessed with chrome trim and pristine presentation, curb feelers made a certain kind of sense. Parallel parking a land yacht wasn't easy, and these provided a cheap, effective warning system. They were a common sight, sometimes factory-installed on luxury models, but often added as an aftermarket accessory. However, their elegance was debatable. They often looked a bit awkward, sticking out from the car's lines. They were prone to bending, breaking, or rusting, quickly becoming an eyesore rather than a helpful tool. As automotive technology advanced, offering more sophisticated solutions like ultrasonic sensors and cameras that provided visual and audible warnings without the scraping soundtrack. The humble curb feeler became obsolete. They now exist mostly as a nostalgic accessory for classic car enthusiasts, a charmingly primitive reminder of a time when avoiding scrapes required listening closely to your car's metallic antennae. Bench seats, front. Remember piling into the front seat of the family car? Not just two people, but maybe three across. That was the magic, or perhaps the squished reality, of the front bench seat. For decades, especially from the 1940s through the 1970s, the bench seat was the standard configuration in most American cars and trucks. It was a simple, cost-effective design, one continuous cushion stretching from door to door, often covered in durable vinyl or plush velour. It offered maximum passenger capacity up front, perfect for families or for cruising with your friends. For couples, it offered, shall we say, closer proximity than today's bucket seats and bulky center consoles allow. It was practically designed for date nights at the drive-in. But tastes and priorities changed. The rise of European sports cars after World War II popularized the sportier feel and better support of individual bucket seats. Center consoles became desirable, housing floor shifters for automatic transmissions, storage compartments, and eventually, cup holders. Safety also played a role. Bucket seats generally offered better support in collisions and worked more effectively with modern seatbelt designs. Slowly but surely, the bench seat began its retreat. By 2013, the Chevrolet Impala became the last American sedan to offer a front bench option. While they lingered longer in pickup trucks, even there, bucket seats or 40/20/40 split benches with folding center consoles are now the norm. It marks the end of an era of shared front row experiences, replaced by individualized zones of comfort and convenience. Push-button transmissions. In the late 1950s, America was obsessed with the future jet planes, rockets, and space travel. And that futuristic fervor found its way onto car dashboards, most notably with Chrysler's push-button automatic transmission. Introduced in 1956, it replaced the traditional column-mounted or floor-mounted shift lever with a sleek pod of buttons, usually located to the left or right of the steering wheel. Buttons labeled R for reverse, N for neutral, D for drive, and perhaps 1 and 2 for lower gears, invited drivers to select their gear with the simple press of a finger. It felt incredibly modern, like piloting a spaceship rather than just driving a car. Chrysler heavily marketed the system, initially called PowerFlight, 2-speed, and later the more robust TorqueFlight, 3-speed, emphasizing its ease of use and futuristic appeal, even suggesting it was particularly suited for women drivers, a common, if patronizing, marketing angle of the time. While undeniably eye-catching and novel, the system wasn't without its drawbacks. Some drivers found the buttons less intuitive than a lever, especially when needing to shift quickly between drive and reverse, like when parallel parking. The mechanisms could also be complex and prone to issues, making repairs potentially difficult and costly. Competitors experimented with similar systems, but by the mid-1960s, the novelty had worn off, and conventional shift levers regained dominance due to their simplicity, reliability, and tactile feedback. The push-button shifter faded away, a relic of atomic age optimism applied to gear selection. Manual window cranks. Before the whisper-quiet hum of electric motors raising and lowering your car windows became ubiquitous, there was the humble window crank. 4 generations of drivers and passengers. Controlling ventilation meant grabbing that handle and giving it a good few turns clockwise to go up, counterclockwise to go down. It was a purely mechanical system, beautifully simple, a handle connected to gears that moved the window glass within the door. There were no wires, no switches, no motors to burn out. Just direct, physical interaction. You felt the window moving. It required a bit of effort, sure, especially for kids reaching across the back seat, and sometimes the mechanism would get stiff or stripped, leading to that frustrating spinning handle that did nothing. But it was reliable, cheap to manufacture, and easy enough to fix. From the earliest enclosed cars right through the 1980s and 90s, manual cranks were standard equipment on base models and many everyday vehicles. Power windows, once a luxury feature, gradually became more common and affordable. By the early 2000s, finding a new car with manual cranks started to become rare. Even famously utilitarian vehicles like the base model Jeep Wrangler eventually succumbed, phasing out manual windows around 2025. While few probably missed the exertion, especially on a hot day, there's a certain mechanical charm and simplicity to the old window crank, a direct connection to the workings of the car that's now almost entirely gone. Floor-mounted dimmer switches. Imagine driving at night, needing to switch between your low beams and high beams. Instead of flicking a stalk by the steering wheel, you had to stomp on a button on the floor with your left foot. Sound awkward? It was. Yet, for about half a century, this was the standard way to control your headlights' brightness in most American cars. Starting way back in the late 1920s, automakers moved the dimmer control from the dashboard or steering wheel hub down to the floor, typically located to the left of the clutch pedal, or where the clutch pedal would be in an automatic. The logic, presumably, was to keep the driver's hands on the wheel. A quick tap with the foot would toggle between high and low beams. While functional, the system had its flaws. Finding that small button with your foot in the dark, especially while navigating a tricky road or dealing with bad weather, wasn't always easy. Drivers might accidentally hit it or struggle to activate it smoothly. Dirt, mud, snow, and spilled sodas could gum up the switch, making it sticky or unresponsive. It just wasn't the most ergonomic or convenient setup. Major manufacturers like Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler all used this floor-mounted design for decades. Eventually, however, ergonomics and convenience won out. By the 1970s and into the early 80s, the dimmer switch migrated back up to the steering column, usually integrated with the turn signal stalk, where it remains today a much more intuitive and easily accessible location. Car phones. Long before smartphones became extensions of our arms, having a phone in your car was the ultimate status symbol and a logistical feat. We're not talking about a sleek device paired via Bluetooth. We're talking about bulky, permanently installed units that made your car feel like a mobile command center. Emerging in the 1980s as a must-have accessory for executives and the affluent, these car phones typically consisted of a handset resembling a regular telephone, often mounted on the transmission tunnel or center console, connected by wires to a large transceiver box hidden somewhere like the trunk or under a seat, and topped off with a conspicuous antenna, usually mounted on the roof or trunk lid. The technology actually had roots much earlier, with Bell System launching the first mobile telephone service back in 1946 in St. Louis. Those early systems were massive, around 80 pounds, and incredibly limited. But the idea persisted. By the 80s, while still expensive and relying on cellular networks with often spotty coverage, car phones signaled importance. Making a call while driving felt futuristic, powerful. The reality, however, was often less glamorous. Calls plagued by static, frequent dropped connections, exorbitant per-minute charges, and the sheer bulk of the equipment. Then, the revolution happened. Portable cell phones arrived in the 1990s. Suddenly, you could take your phone with you, not just use it in the car. The permanently installed car phone became obsolete almost overnight, a fascinating but short-lived chapter in mobile communication, remembered now mostly for its high price and high-profile image. Fender Skirts. Want to make a car look longer, sleeker, and maybe a touch more sophisticated, at least by mid-century standards? Just cover up the top half of the rear wheels. That was the thinking behind Fender Skirts, also known as spats in some parts of the world. These curved panels, usually made of metal and often adorned with chrome trim, bolted over the rear wheel openings, creating a smooth, unbroken line along the car's body side. Popular from the 1940s through the 1960s and lingering on some models into the 70s, Fender Skirts were primarily an aesthetic choice. They contributed to the long, low, streamlined look that was fashionable for luxury cars and cruisers of the era, like the iconic Cadillac DeVille's or Chevrolet Impalas. They made the car appear to float slightly, hiding the mundane mechanical bits of the wheels and suspension. While they might have offered a minuscule aerodynamic benefit, their main purpose was style. However, that style came with a significant practical drawback. Changing a flat tire became a multi-step process. You couldn't just jack up the car and remove the wheel. You had to unbolt and remove the fender skirt first, often requiring tools and adding time and hassle to an already unpleasant task. As design trends shifted towards more exposed wheels and a less heavy look in the 1970s, and as practicality perhaps gained a bit more importance, fender skirts gradually disappeared from most production cars, becoming a distinctive feature primarily associated with classic American cruisers and the custom car scene. Vent windows. Before air conditioning became standard equipment, keeping cool while driving often involved a clever little piece of glass, the vent window. These small, usually triangular windows were located at the front edge of the front doors, and sometimes the rear doors too. They didn't roll down. Instead, they pivoted outward, controlled by a small latch or crank. From the 1930s all the way into the 1980s, these were incredibly common on cars and trucks of all price ranges. Their genius lay in their ability to provide targeted airflow without the wind noise and buffeting caused by opening the main window. You could crack open the vent window just a bit to get a gentle breeze directed right at you, or angle it to pull stale air or cigarette smoke out of the cabin. They were surprisingly effective at making non-air-conditioned drives more tolerable, especially in hot weather. They also allowed for some airflow even during rain, without letting too much water in. But like many simple, effective features, their days were numbered. The rise of standard air conditioning reduced their necessity. Designers seeking smoother aerodynamics and cleaner body lines saw them as an interruption. Eliminating them also saved manufacturing costs and complexity, and potentially reduced wind noise at highway speeds, though ironically, they were great at reducing certain types of noise. By the 1990s, they had virtually vanished from new cars. Yet, classic car enthusiasts often missed them dearly, valuing that directable, fresh airflow a simple, elegant solution from a breezier era. CD changers. Remember the satisfying mechanical whir and clunk from the trunk or under the seat? That was the sound of your CD changer, the pinnacle of mobile music convenience in the late 1990s and early 2000s. Before MP3 players and streaming took over, if you wanted a large selection of music on the go without constantly swapping discs in the dashboard player, the CD changer was the answer. These units typically held 6, 10, or even 12 compact discs loaded into a removable magazine or cartridge. You'd carefully load your favorite albums into the slots at home, slide the magazine into the changer unit, often hidden away to save space, and then control everything from the main stereo head unit in the dash. Press a button, and the changer would mechanically select and play the disc and track you wanted. It felt incredibly high-tech, giving you hours of uninterrupted music for road trips. No more fumbling with jewel cases while driving. Of course, they weren't perfect. The mechanisms could jam, discs could occasionally get scratched or fail to read, and navigating between discs and tracks using the often limited controls on the radio could be a bit clunky. Plus, hitting a big pothole could sometimes cause a skip, just like with a portable CD player. But for a significant period, the CD changer represented the ultimate in-car audio experience, your own curated jukebox on wheels. Then came the digital revolution, making even a 12-disc changer seem quaintly limited. They faded fast, replaced by USB ports and Bluetooth connections. Hidden fuel fillers. There was a certain suave coolness, a bit of automotive magic, to pulling into a gas station in a classic American car and having the attendant, yes, attendants used to pump your gas, flip down the license plate, or swing open a taillight to find the fuel filler cap. Hiding the gas cap wasn't about function, it was pure style, a way to achieve cleaner, uninterrupted body lines. This trend took off in the 1940s and was particularly popular through the 1950s, 60s, and into the 70s. Cadillac was an early adopter, tucking the filler behind a hinged taillight on some 1941 models. Other brands quickly followed suit, finding creative places to conceal it behind trim pieces, under flip-up emblems, or, most famously, behind the rear license plate. Cars like the mid-60s Ford Thunderbird or numerous Chevrolet models featured this license plate trick, making refueling feel like revealing a secret compartment. It looked sleek, eliminating the visual disruption of a fuel door on the fender or rear quarter panel. However, the design wasn't always practical. Filling up could sometimes be awkward, increasing the chance of spilling gasoline on the bumper or taillight assembly. Mechanisms could wear out or get damaged. Eventually, safety regulations concerning rear impact collisions and fuel system integrity, particularly for center-rear filler locations, contributed to the decline of this practice. The conventional side-mounted fuel door proved safer and simpler. But the hidden fuel filler remains a charmingly clever design touch from an era when aesthetics often took precedence. Highway Hi-Fi. Imagine cruising down the highway in your brand new 1956 Chrysler, DeSoto, Dodge, or Plymouth, and instead of fiddling with the radio dial, you're listening to Frank Sinatra crooning from a vinyl record spinning smoothly beneath your dashboard. Sounds like science fiction? It was science fact, albeit short-lived. Chrysler, in a bold collaboration with CBS Laboratories, introduced the Highway Hi-Fi, an actual underdash record player available as a factory option. This wasn't your standard turntable, though. To combat skipping on bumpy roads, it used a special counterweighted tone arm and played unique 7-inch records designed exclusively for the system. These records spun at an ultra-slow 16 2/3 RPM, half the speed of a typical LP, allowing nearly an hour of listening time per side. The catch? You couldn't play your regular records. You had to buy the special discs from Columbia Records, owned by CBS, which offered a curated catalog featuring artists like Sinatra, Percy Faith, classical selections, and even Broadway show tunes. While incredibly innovative and futuristic for its time, arguably the first integrated, non-radio audio system offered by a car maker, the Highway Hi-Fi was ultimately a commercial flop. It was expensive, around $200 extra, a hefty sum back then, prone to skipping despite the special design, and the proprietary record format severely limited musical choices. By 1959, Chrysler had moved on to promoting 45 RPM players from RCA instead, and the Highway Hi-Fi became a fascinating footnote in automotive audio history, a brilliant, if flawed, attempt to bring vinyl vibes to the open road. Fender vents or portholes. Alright, let's dig up another relic that screams style over substance. Those fake Fender vents or portholes. Remember those? Especially prominent on Buicks, starting in the late 40s, they called them venti ports. Typically, you'd see 3 or 4 chrome-rimmed circles marching proudly down the side of the front fender. Legend has it the original idea was inspired by fighter planes and maybe even offered some engine heat ventilation back then. But very quickly, the concept devolved into pure decoration for countless other cars trying to look sporty or upscale. Often, these vents led absolutely nowhere. They were just stylish indentations or stuck-on chrome pieces on solid sheet metal. They didn't vent anything, didn't improve aerodynamics, didn't serve any real purpose other than adding a visual flourish. It was all about projecting an image of power or performance without actually contributing to it. While iconic for a certain period, mostly through the 50s and 60s, this kind of non-functional ornamentation eventually fell out of favor as automotive design language moved towards cleaner lines and, frankly, less pointless bling. A classic case of looking fast while standing still. So, which of these automotive quirks brings back memories, or just makes you shake your head and wonder, what were they thinking? Drop a comment below, and tell us which feature surprised you or which one you secretly wish still existed. If you got a kick out of this trip down automotive memory lane, please hit that thumbs up button, subscribe for more journeys into the past, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss our next video.